You get a text from your mom. It says, "Dinner at 6. Your aunt is coming. LOL." And suddenly you're spiraling. Is your aunt the joke? Is your mom laughing at your misfortune? Is she warning you? Or is she just having a stroke? You are 34 years old and you cannot decode a 3-letter acronym your own generation invented. Meanwhile, a 19-year-old reads that same text and immediately knows something is deeply wrong. Not because of the aunt, but because of the LOL. To them, an unironic LOL from a parent is either a cry for help or a sign that the sender has been on the internet long enough to become a completely different person. See, back in 1990, LOL had a job. It meant you were actually physically laughing out loud. Simple, functional. But today, LOL is just punctuation. It's the millennial period. It's a vibe check we slap onto the end of a sentence to prove we aren't being passive-aggressive. If I say, "I'm fine," I sound like I'm about to file for divorce. But if I say, "I'm fine, LOL," it means I'm barely holding it together, but in a fun way. We've turned LOL into the word stop at the end of a 1920s telegram. Arriving at noon, LOL. The house is on fire, LOL. Please send help, LOL. We know it's redundant. We know we're using it as a filler emoji for our filler emojis, and yet we literally cannot stop. My name is Eddie Freeman. Every week on this channel, we dig into why generations confuse each other. Humor, money, work, relationships, all of it. Why are they like that? Subscribe if any of that sounds like your kind of thing. To understand what LOL actually is now, you have to go back to what texting was when millennials first got their hands on it. It's the late 90s, early 2000s. Phones can send text messages, but they're not smartphones. There's no tone of voice, no facial expression, no body language. You're taking something that humans have spent hundreds of thousands of years doing in person, communicating with each other, and stripping out almost every signal that makes communication work. What's left is the words. Just the words, cold on a screen. The problem is that words without tone are a minefield. That's great can mean it's genuinely great. It can mean you're furious. It can mean you're being sarcastic. It can mean you've completely given up. The same two words, completely different meanings, and the person reading them has no way of knowing which one you meant. Millennials were the first generation to deal with this at scale. And they solved it by inventing a new layer of emotional punctuation. LOL, haha, OMG, ugh. None of these words carried their literal meaning anymore. They were tone markers, mood indicators, a way of saying, here is how I actually feel about what I just wrote. One person in that Reddit thread nailed it better than most linguists have. LOL is just punctuation at this point. A period that is not meant to be read as passive-aggressive. I have finished my thought, and my tone is friendly and jovial. Whereas a period alone means the sentence is over and the person is serious. That's exactly right. When a millennial ends a sentence with LOL, they're not saying they laughed. They're saying, "I'm not mad, this is light, we're good." It's a social softener, a warmth signal, a tiny flag that says the vibe is relaxed even if the words themselves don't show it. And here's where it gets interesting generationally. Because Gen Z watched millennials do this and came to a completely different conclusion. To Gen Z, LOL reads as old. Not funny old, just old. One commenter in that thread mentioned their alpha generation daughter said she would never use LOL because her parent used it too much and it made her hate it. That's the cycle in real time. One generation adopts a word, uses it so constantly that it loses all meaning, and the next generation abandons it entirely as a marker of not being that generation. Gen Z replaced LOL with point, the skull emoji, which means something is so funny you died. Or they use point, the crying face, but not to mean sad, to mean something is hilarious. If you send a Gen Z person a meme and they respond with point, they are telling you it's the funniest thing they've seen all week. Someone in the comments pointed this out and got a pretty good response. So what does Gen Z do? They just sound serious and mean all the time? To which someone replied with just point. Which, if you're a millennial reading that, probably looks like a threat. The LOL evolution actually maps almost perfectly onto how each generation communicates humor through text more broadly. Boomers largely didn't develop digital communication habits early enough to build a native vocabulary. When they text, it reads either very formal, full sentences, proper punctuation, sign-offs, or they overcorrect into all caps and multiple exclamation marks and the emoji, which they use exactly as intended, meaning something is funny, which is why has now become the boomer laughing emoji, and Gen Z has abandoned it entirely. Gen X landed somewhere in the middle, slightly skeptical of the whole enterprise, more likely to just not respond, or to respond with something dry that makes you wonder if they're joking. The XD emoticon was big with older millennials and Gen X crossover, a sideways laughing face that now looks as dated as a frosted tip hairstyle. Millennials built the LOL ecosystem from scratch and then became so dependent on it, they genuinely cannot stop. There are people in that Reddit thread describing going back through already sent messages to replace LOLs with ha-has because they'd used too many in a row and felt self-conscious about it. One person said they have filler emojis for their filler emojis. Another described LOL as something they use like breathing. They are not exaggerating. It is completely involuntary at this point. Someone in the thread made an observation that one person said they haven't stopped thinking about. Millennials use LOL the way people used stop at the end of a telegram. Same function, different era. A punctuation mark disguised as a word. There's also a class of LOL that operates differently from all the others, and millennials understand this instinctively even if they've never articulated it. LOL, on its own, lowercase, no caps, friendly, casual, things are fine. LOL, in all caps, either something is genuinely very funny or the person is older and hasn't calibrated yet. LOL, or lol, actually laughing. The repetition is the signal. Lamau, 1 degree above lol, something landed harder. Lamau with the extra letters. This was legitimately funny. The vowels are the meter of amusement. Haha. According to several people in the thread, this one means they actually laughed out loud. More real than lol, which is ironic given what lol supposedly stands for. Ha. One commenter called this the more depressive lol. That's accurate. And then there's ugh. OMG, same, and a rotating cast of supporting cast members that all do the same emotional labor of signaling tone without having to actually describe the tone. The whole system is baroque and completely intuitive to anyone who grew up in it and completely opaque to everyone who didn't. What millennials built without realizing it was a new dialect of written communication. Not formal language, not quite slang, something in between. A set of emotional shorthand tools that made text messaging actually human. The irony is that the generation mocked for being overly expressive, for oversharing, for putting their feelings everywhere, developed these tools precisely because text gave them no other way to show how they felt. LOL wasn't self-indulgence. It was a workaround for a technological limitation that nobody had solved yet. Gen Z got better tools. Reaction features, voice messages, more nuanced emoji. They didn't need LOL the same way because the platforms they grew up on gave them more ways to communicate tone. But millennials were already wired by then. The habit was set. The LOL was load-bearing in their communication style, and removing it would require taking apart something they built over 20 years of daily use. So they kept it. They kept it long after it stopped meaning what it said, long after younger people stopped using it, long after they themselves started feeling a little embarrassed about it. Because some things just get into you, and no amount of self-awareness makes them go away. LOL.